All right, I think we have a critical mass here, a quorum, if you will, to get this webinar going. So hello, everyone. My name is Eli Lieberman, and I am the Director of Clean Energy Financing with Michigan Saves. I want to thank you all so much for joining us here for this webinar on implementing the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund in Michigan. As we'll talk about, this is a generational opportunity for the state of Michigan, and we're really excited to sort of kick off the discussion of how we can design this to make sure all Michiganders have access to the clean energy economy. So I will just run through a quick agenda here of what we will talk about. First, I should probably make sure PowerPoint works. There we go. So first we'll do our CEO, Mary Templeton. I'll let her introduce herself, but she's going to do an overview of Michigan Saves. Then she'll talk a little bit about coordinating all of the federal funding opportunities that are available through both the IIJA and the IRA, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act. We'll do a deep dive into what we know about the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund to date. The EPA recently released an implementation framework that gave us a much better idea of what the program will eventually look like. We'll talk about equity in terms of implementing the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. Nishat Colleen will lead that for Michigan Saves. And then finally, we'll talk about next steps and how everyone involved can continue to provide us feedback as we look forward to implementing this program in Michigan. So with that, I will turn it over to Mary Templeton, who will give us the Michigan Saves overview.
Great. Thanks so much, Eli. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We really appreciate it. I am Mary Templeton. I'm the president and CEO of Michigan Saves. We were created back in 2009 by the state of Michigan through a grant from the Michigan Public Service Commission. We are the nation's first nonprofit green bank. Our mission centers on promoting accessible, equitable, and just investments in all things related to clean energy to support healthy and thriving communities. Since we issued our first loan in 2010, we've served over 40,000 residential and commercial customers and supported over $450 million worth of energy investments all over the states. Next slide, Eli. The way that we operate is by using public investments like for those from the state of Michigan and the U.S. Department of Energy to leverage private capital to address market gaps. Public funds are not used to support operations. Rather, credit enhancements like the loan loss reserve, which is the underpinning of the majority of our residential and commercial programs, allows lenders to offer accessible financing that accelerate the adoption of energy improvements like those articulated in the My Healthy Climate Plan. We've been able to leverage every public dollar invested in Michigan Saves with $30 of private funds, an incredible leverage ratio. And since defaults on the loans are less than 2% of the projects that we've supported, these funds can be recycled over time. We've also supported and support utility on-bill repayment programs like those offered in Traverse City and the City of Holland. And we offer special incentives like utility interest rate buydowns for commercial projects and municipally funded grant programs like the one we recently launched in Sterling Heights. The Kresge Foundation has provided a low-cost loan with program-related investments, or PRI, to Michigan Saves, where we pay a small cost for the capital to pilot a loan program in the city of Detroit that extends financing to homeowners and business owners who otherwise are unable to access funding for their energy projects. We expect to continue to expand programs like these with the federal funding that's become recently available. Next slide. The graphic that'll show next showcases the many federal funding opportunities that are or will be available, one of which is the topic of this webinar, the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. Our intent is not for you to be able to read every aspect of this slide. It would be near impossible for you to do that. Our intent is to show that there are so many different funding opportunities currently available, including things like additional weatherization incentives, rebates for electrification and other efficiency and renewable energy improvements, and tax incentives. It is complicated, it is complex, and most people do not understand where the incentives are coming from or how to access them. Next slide. And to maximize these investments in Michigan, these programs will need to be coordinated. We've learned over the last 13 years, Eli, you can advance the slide here, and by running large programs like the state's $30 million energy efficiency stimulus funding program called Better Buildings for Michigan back in 2010 through 2014, that getting these incentives out the door, it's not as simple as if you build it, they will come. Rather, we see an opportunity similar to that deployed with Better Buildings for Michigan to coordinate efforts throughout the state to administer these incentives, these grants, these rebates, tax credits, and financing to deploy an approach that includes customer-centric education and outreach that weaves all of these programs together, and importantly, centers on serving underrepresented communities by ensuring that these communities are part of the process from the onset. Our vision is that we believe in an equitable transition to a carbon-free Michigan, where everyone has access to the benefits of clean energy and climate resilient solutions. We'll use this lens as we engage with all of you and your colleagues around the state in developing the programs supported by these incredible funding opportunities, like those in the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund that Eli will describe next. Eli, back to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mary. Okay, now let's get into the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. Awesome. All right. So this is the big topic here today. So the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund was probably the single largest piece of the Inflation Reduction Act, which passed through Congress and was signed by President Biden last year. And the IRA actually reflects likely maybe the biggest investment in addressing climate change that certainly the United States has ever undertaken, and possibly even any country has undertaken. So being able to have a piece of the biggest chunk of the biggest piece of the climate legislation that maybe we've known is really exciting. So what is the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund? Well, it's a $27 billion program that's being implemented by the Environmental Protection Agency to provide green financing opportunities. It was recently divided into 3 separate competitions that will sort of tackle different sectors of the economy, and I'll go into those in a second. But regardless, for all 3 competitions, there are 3 primary objectives. And those are on the screen, but I'll also read them. It's to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and other air pollutants, deliver the benefits of greenhouse gas and air pollution reduction to American communities, particularly low-income and disadvantaged communities, and to mobilize financing and private capital to stimulate additional deployment of greenhouse gas air pollution reduction projects. And as I go through the competitions, I think it'll be important to note a few of these primary objectives. One is that while the name is the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, it also talks about other air pollutants. So in this regard, we can think of things like particulate matter, and projects and money can be used to reduce, the EPA even calls out things like diesel emissions. And when you retrofit buildings, not only to make them more energy efficient, but also to make them healthier places to live. So that's important to note. Secondly, the emphasis on low-income and disadvantaged communities. The EPA is really emphasizing that we lean into Justice 40 and that the money is primarily directed at these communities, and Nishat is going to talk about that later. And then lastly, it's this concept of leverage, that we want to make sure that this is not just a one-time funding opportunity, but that when we build out the ecosystem for the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, that it can be continuous, that we can use this money to sort of capitalize and transform the market so it can continue on, for decades to come. So I think those are all really exciting points. Okay. So the first competition is called the National Clean Investment Fund, or the NCIF, as people seem to be referring to it as. It's a $14 billion program. And how it will work is it will flow from the Environmental Protection Agency to 2 to 3 nationwide nonprofits. And those nonprofits will then partner with other capital providers, whether they're on the ground in communities or whether they're sort of above, I don't know if that's the right way of saying it, but like Wall Street, large financial institutions where they can be this link between bringing in additional money and then also linking the dollars to capital providers. But in addition to that, the recipients of the NCIF dollars will be instructed to actually directly invest into qualified projects. So this will likely mean larger projects that can't be handled by other parts of the competition that I'll talk about that are like more on the community level. This will be sort of large, we can think of like wind farms, utility scale solar. We can think of projects that's maybe cross-geographic, cross-jurisdictional. So it wouldn't be clear what local lender would work on it. You would want one sort of nationwide lender to work on it. The EPA is prioritizing actually 3 project categories for the NCIF. One is distributed power and generation. So that would be more on-site power. The second is retrofitting and decarbonizing existing buildings. So in addition to making buildings more energy efficient, that can also include what I was talking about before. That's like making them healthier homes to live in. And then the third one is transportation. So you can think of this as also electrifying fleets, but the EPA does call out that when we're working on this, it's important to think about where are particulate emissions the worst and how can you use money not only to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, say through EVs, but also lower particulate emissions in disadvantaged communities. It requires at least 40% of the funds to be spent in Justice 40 communities. And then, as I discussed before, a big thing is this idea of continued liquidity. And that's that this should be a process where dollars that are spent can be kind of bundled and warehoused and sold into the private markets. So that way there can be continued money brought in through a cycle. So it's really cool that the EPA is sort of structuring this to be this nationwide institution that can provide continued liquidity, that can invest in community lenders and can also directly invest into projects. So now that that's like a broad overview of the NCIF, what does it look like in Michigan? Well, Michigan Saves, as Mary was saying, is Michigan's nonprofit green bank. And we're also proud members of the the Coalition for Green Capital, which is also known as the American Green Bank Consortium. And CGC, Coalition for Green Capital, is seeking money from the NCIF to capitalize a national green bank. So that would be one of those nationwide institutions that can support community lenders such as Michigan Saves, can directly invest into projects, and can access financial markets. Because we're a member of CGC, if a national green bank was created, that national green bank would be able to provide Michigan Saves with financial assistance that we could then use to fill market gaps across Michigan in those 3 project categories that I discussed: distributed power and generation, retrofits, and transportation. The EPA doesn't limit it to those, but that's their focus. And then another thing is that we're really looking for community feedback. So on the next slide, I'm going to talk about what are some ideas that Michigan Saves has, where if we were to be capitalized through a national green bank via the NCIF, what are market gaps that we see where we could deploy that money? But we want to make sure that it's not just us thinking through it alone, that there's a robust community engagement process, because we can't identify the market gaps ourselves. Like, we need help from people that are on the ground that know them, and then also have ideas on how they can be filled with that's albeit new products or programs. So at the end of this webinar, we'll talk about next steps and how you can provide feedback. But this is really a crucial area where we're looking for feedback when it comes time to design these products and programs. Like, what are the market gaps that the community is seeing, and how do they see that they could be filled with these dollars? So here's some early ideas where if we were to receive an influx of capital from the National Green Bank via the NCIF, what would we do with them? Some of the market gaps that we've identified through outreach to contractors and lenders and community organizations and business owners are, we know that there's an excellent PACE market, property assessed clean energy, in Michigan, thanks to our good friends Lean and Green. But we also know that the market for PACE has sort of shifted to higher dollar amounts. And PACE brings these wonderful long terms, but if you're only able to use them on $1 million above projects, we know we'd love those really long terms for, say, a business to take out a loan to decarbonize, or for a low-income multifamily building to take out a loan to retrofit to be more energy efficient and healthy. But what if it's not $1 million? So then the PACE market is a little more difficult to access. So that could be a great use of greenhouse gas reduction fund monies, where we could provide a really long-term 20-year low-cost loan for, say, $500,000, $400,000, maybe even lower. So that we think it could be a great market use for these monies. Another one is bridging the solar investment tax credit. So if you're not like geeking out on the Inflation Reduction Act constantly, one of the big things that happened, and this is kind of a game changer for institutions like nonprofits that don't pay federal income tax, is that they're going to have access to the solar investment tax credit for the first time. And this will allow them to significantly lower the project cost of installing solar on their building. But the issue that we don't quite know yet, and we're waiting for guidance from the Department of the Treasury, is how long will it take for a nonprofit to receive that direct pay, is what they're calling it, for the solar investment tax credit. And it's possible it could take 6 months, 12 months, 18 months. And if we're talking about a $100,000 project, a $200,000 project with an investment tax credit that might be worth $50,000 or more, if you have to wait 12 or 18 months for that $50,000, that might be too long for a nonprofit to hold that money. They would rather put it towards their primary mission. So what if Michigan Saves could bridge that tax credit up front so you wouldn't have to wait for it? And then in 18 months, when you received your tax credit, you could pay Michigan Saves back. So that's another example we're really excited about. Nishat will talk a little bit later about this really innovative program we're operating in Detroit, called the Detroit Loan Fund, that uses an alternative underwriting criteria. And it's really what we've found to be an excellent way of accessing communities that have been historically excluded from the lending ecosystem and accessing loans for clean energy and renewable energy. So we would love to be able to take that statewide. Nishat will talk about that a little bit more, but that would be another example. We'll talk about Solar for All, which is the third competition, but making community solar, if the legislation in Michigan was a little more favorable, could be a great use for this money. Affordable housing, working capital loans for startup contractors, especially minority-owned contractors. We know that with this influx of capital, there's going to be an influx of projects. And with projects, we know that contractors are ultimately like boots on the ground. They're the most important people in this whole process. So we want to make sure that there's a robust contractor ecosystem in Michigan that can meet the need of potentially all these projects are coming. So what if we could use greenhouse gas reduction fund monies to help support and bring new contractors into the Michigan ecosystem, and just help them get started with really low cost working capital, particularly, as I was saying, to help minority contractors enter into the Michigan space. And then there are lots more ideas. We have too many to go into today. But microgrids, getting to that distributed generation potential, electric vehicles. We would love to be able to help small businesses. Say you're just local flower shop that offers deliveries. Could we help them convert their fleet to be electric? There's lots of ideas we have. But again, we'll ask for your feedback at the end, because if some of these are on your list as well, we would love to know how you think we could fill those market gaps. Like, what would the product actually look like that the money would be used for? Okay, next we have the Clean Communities Investment Accelerator. And this one is $6 billion. and it will go from the EPA to 2 to 7 nationwide nonprofits. And instead of the nonprofits like in the previous one, sort of taking that money, figuring out how to invest it and such, this one is actually more of a pass-through. So the recipients of CCIA money will need to pass through 95% of the funds to community lenders. And then those community lenders can engage in lending for qualified projects, such as a small business to become more energy efficient, a nonprofit to install solar. Maybe you want to start your own residential energy efficiency lending program, like Michigan Saves works with our credit union partners for, and I'll talk about that more in a second, but that's what this money could be used for. It can be used as sort of capitalized lending programs to boost the balance sheet of community lenders. So community lenders can be the local community development financial institution or credit union in your neighborhood. They can be green banks such as Michigan Saves. They can be housing finance agencies such as MISHDA will have access to this money. The total amount that can be passed through from that nationwide nonprofit to an individual community lender is $5,625,000. $5 million can be used as that balance sheet capital that I was talking about so that a community lender can start offering clean energy loans. And then $625,000 can be used for technical assistance. And that's really exciting because what that means is that you can take the $625,000, you can use it for training for staff and management at the community lender on how to implement green financing. You can use it to hire more staff to operate these green financing programs. You can use it to contract with community-based organizations to help spread the word and build the pipeline about green lending. So that's what that $625,000 can be used for. And important to note that 100% of the funds for the CCIA need to be spent in low income and disadvantaged communities. All right, so what does the CCIA look like in Michigan? Well, Michigan Saves, as Mary was talking about, currently partners with credit unions and CDFIs to offer our clean energy loans, both on the residential side and on the commercial side. As Mary was talking about, we have a loan loss reserve thanks to the state of Michigan, and that's allowed us to approach that, $500 million in lending. So we have this really incredibly robust ecosystem that allows this to work. And that includes over 1,000 certified Michigan Saves contractors. We have an incredible software program that allows the lenders and the contractors in Michigan Saves to talk with each other. We have the loan loss reserve. So if a new community lender in Michigan wanted to get involved in the residential lending space in the Michigan Saves ecosystem, which is sort of widely regarded as the best in the country, they could use the balance sheet capital from the CCIA to offer these loan products. They could join the Michigan Saves ecosystem, have access to the contractor network, have access to the loan loss reserve, and then deploy it statewide. And we would love to bring more lenders into this space. And we would love to talk with any lenders out there about CCIA funds, green lending, Michigan Saves. And then, as I was talking about earlier with the NCIF, how it's designed to provide continued liquidity into this market transformation, into this new ecosystem we're building. It may seem like $5 million. It's crazy to say, but is maybe not a ton of money for an individual lender, especially as we were just saying, we're coming up on $500 million in loans. Well, what Michigan Saves can do is, because we're members of CGC and we'll be part of that National Green Bank, well, we can help community lenders warehouse and sell those loans to the National Green Bank. So you can continue to bring money into this ecosystem, which is really cool. And it will be really important as we design this, as Mary was talking about, that all these programs work together and they all fit within this broader ecosystem. So really exciting opportunity here. I think there are like 50 plus CDFIs in Michigan. So we could really just build up the green lending ecospace here. So that is the CCIA. And then lastly, we have the Solar for All program. And this is a $7 billion competition. So if we add 14 to 6 and finally 7, we get $27 billion. So that's the total amount that was in the GGRF. So this one is actually to go to 60 geographic regions, the EPA is saying. And by that, they mean they're hoping to spend the money or helping to grant the funds to one per state, plus some tribal representatives and territories. So how it will work is because there are so many eligible entities like state governments, municipalities, tribes, territories, eligible nonprofits, is the EPA is going to ask for, in each geographic region, for the state government, the state energy office of that geographic region, to sort of raise their hand if they want to be the ones to implement this funding. And if they raise their hand, then they'll be the ones that will be asked to apply on behalf of that geographic region. If the state decides that they don't want to apply for this funding, then it will go to the next level, which will be those municipalities or tribal governments or eligible nonprofits. So they're the ones that would be able to design the program in that geographic region. What Solar for All is it kind of is dollars, the $7 billion is to, the EPA says, create or expand Solar for All programs. And they sort of define that as a program that brings and ensures access to the benefits of solar energy to low-income and disadvantaged communities. So this is 100% directed at low-income and disadvantaged communities. And it also needs to bring, quote, meaningful benefit to those communities. So the EPA is saying that you can't just design a system that sort of looks good on paper. It needs to actually bring meaningful benefit. And they define meaningful benefit. And I won't go into that actual definition, but one of the key things that it talks about is reducing the energy burden of a low-income and disadvantaged community by at least 20%. So it really is saying, like, this program needs to have a meaningful impact on the recipient of it, which I think is really great. And the program also says it needs to be used for zero emissions technologies. And the EPA is defining that as both community solar and residential solar. They're defining it as the solar panels themselves, associated storage, potential roof upgrades, and then the rest is a little more murky, but other enabling upgrades. And we think what they mean with that is probably just like electrical panels, but not anything deeper, not into like weatherizing a house before it needs to be solarized. It'll probably just be stuff that's really just necessary to install and run the panels. So when we talk about a successful implementation of this program in Michigan, it'll be really important, as Mary was saying, that this is coordinated with the NCIF and the CCIA and all of the rebates and weatherization programs, because if the money can only be used for those more like solar specific pieces, then we're going to want to make sure that the homes are solar ready. So it's very possible that they'll need to flow through a rebate ecosystem, a CCIA lender, Michigan Saves, an NCIF loan through Michigan Saves. All of that might need to happen before a home's eligible for Solar for All. So that'll be a really important consideration. And then also, I think a crux of this is that Solar for All actually allows for rebates and incentives. The NCIF and the CCIA, excuse me, are fairly clear that the dollars can sort of only be used for what they call eligible financial activities. And they sort of say that grants are not included in that. But for the Solar for All, the EPA clearly says that rebates and incentives are eligible uses of the funds. So what that means is we can use that to subsidize the cost of these solar systems. So if we were looking to install a solar on a household with a lower area median income, we could subsidize that cost through Solar for All. So that's really exciting that we can do that here. So for Michigan and Solar for All, the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy, EAGLE as they go by, has sort of signaled that they will raise their hand and that they're going to want to be the ones to take the lead to apply for these funds in Michigan. So I would track their social channels, their website, to see as they start to begin the process of developing what this could look like, how they're going to solicit public input. But we do know that they plan for it to, fully support the My Healthy Climate Plan goals. And then we also anticipate that they'll want it to work within the broader bipartisan infrastructure, IRA, and greenhouse gas reduction fund ecosystems, as we've been talking about, that core of it needing to be not just a one-off program, that it's firmly implemented in the ecosystem that we're building, to ensure that we're having the maximum benefit in Michigan, and also just not a one-off benefit, but a lasting benefit. So an example of this could be a tiered rebate and loan program. So if you're based on your income level, you get a higher subsidy level to install solar on your home. And then the delta could be made up with a low-cost loan via a CCIA lender or Michigan Saves. So that way you could really stretch the funding, make sure it brings that 20% benefit. You could do the modeling to figure out, what is the savings of a typical household and how much subsidy needs to be for that household to ensure you hit that 20% savings, and then finish it off with a loan. And then you could also even more cleverly use something like our Detroit Loan Fund that uses an alternative underwriting criteria so that we sort of remove credit score and the historical injustices around that. So we can really create something super innovative and exciting here. So we're really excited about working with the state of Michigan. And then, as I was saying, weatherization is going to be crucial in this regard too, because if we just put solar onto a house that is leaky and is not fully electrified, then we're not going to have that meaningful benefit. We'll just sort of be wasting the energy that the solar is producing. So you'll want to make sure that homes, can go through that weatherization process first. So that could be solar for all in Michigan. And then let me just do a quick time check here. I think we're doing okay. So this is a bit of a complicated slide, but I haven't quite seen it laid out like this before, and it's still a work in process, so bear with us. But it kind of shows you the three different competitions and then how they all are can be intertwined and linked together. So on the far left, you have the EPA. You can see it's offering the three competitions, the NCIF, the CCIA, and Solar for All. You can see it flowing to the eligible recipients, so a national green bank, those pass-through nonprofits that we talked about, and then that sort of priority system of either a state agency or a municipal or nonprofit for Solar for All. And then you can kind of see, like, right in the middle there, how community lending institutions are sort of the crux of all this. They're going to receive CCIA monies. It can be warehoused and sold up to the National Green Bank. You can see that the money can flow up from a community lender to a National Green Bank. And then that there can be sold off to a large financial institution. So we can see that consistent source of money flowing to community lenders. We can also see on the top that the National Green Bank can do direct investing itself, qualified projects there. And then we can also see how the community lenders can fit into the Solar for All. So we can see how they can offer Solar for All loans that can be tied with the subsidy. And then that can also be passed all the way up through to the National Green Bank. So you can really see if this is designed in an ecosystem, that it's not going to be, even though the arrows flow just one way from the NCIF, the CCIA, and the Solar for All, it's just a one-time thing from the EPA. But on the right side, you see if we kind of design this to all work together, then it's not a one-time thing. This is a constant revolving system that can continue to meet the needs of low-income and disadvantaged communities. So I think this is kind of a neat way of looking at it. I want to kind of continue to make it look a little more cleaner, but thanks for looking at the early iteration of it. And then lastly, I just kind of wanted to circle back to this whole notion of the collaborative implementation, and that we just talked about the greenhouse gas reduction fund right there. We didn't talk about really the homes or hero rebates. We talked a little bit about solar investment tax credit, but we didn't talk a lot about changes in tax credits. We didn't talk about changes in the home energy efficiency tax credit. We didn't talk about other government funders that could be involved in this. We didn't talk about what a robust statewide energy concierge or technical assistance provider could look like. So we need to ensure that we plug all of this into this really sort of ecosystem that Mary let us all off on. So just kind of want to reiterate that it's we really just want your feedback to make sure that we're building this sustainable ecosystem that provides the easiest journey for a customer. Because if a resident or a business needs to go to one agency and another agency and then, talk with someone else about their tax credits and talk to a contractor, and it could just get really complicated and people could get burned out and they could just there could be a lot of attrition. They could just fall out of wanting to take advantage of this. So we'd love your feedback on this pyramid, on this idea of this ecosystem. So on that option to provide feedback, please talk about this. And then I'll finish off before turning it over to Nishat by talking about the timeline. So February 2023 was when we got the first sort of word on what this program was going to look like. In April 2023, the implementation framework was released by the EPA, and that implementation framework was the one that broke out those three competitions, the NCIF, the CCIA, and the Solar for All. So that happened in April. The notice of funding opportunity will be released in the summer. That's when the EPA will effectively release the application. We've heard rumors it could happen in June, so keep your eyes out for that. So you can see we are here, and that's between the implementation framework and the summer when the NOFO or the application will be released. The EPA has said fall applications will close. So that will be for those 2 to 3 nationwide nonprofits, for nationwide nonprofits that are applying for the NCIF or the CCIA, or for whoever is going to apply in that geographic region for Solar for All. So that'll be the fall. And then after winter, spring, and summer, the announcements and awards will be made. And the legislation, the IRA actually says that the money must be obligated by September 2024. So you can see that winter, spring, and summer, all of the selections and awards will need to be made by 2024. So that is the timeline of the GGRF. And now I will turn it over to Nishat to talk about the equity components of all of this. So thank you so much, Nishat.
Thank you, Eli. Hi, everyone. My name is Nishat Killeen. I am a senior project manager here at Michigan Saves, and I am going to talk briefly about some of the concepts some of the concepts that you've been hearing about. You got a little preview of it just now. Mostly about how the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund looks at, highlights equity and justice throughout its design. You've heard some of the concepts already, but to make sure everyone's on the same page, we'll start with the Justice 40 initiative. This initiative was announced via an executive order by President Biden in January of 2021. So it definitely predates the Inflation Reduction Act and predates the timeline that Eli just showed on the screen by quite a bit. As I mentioned, it's an overarching initiative that mandates that 40% of certain federal investments, certain federal funds, flow to disadvantaged communities that are marginalized, underserved, or overburdened by pollution. And many agencies and many of their programs fall under the requirements of this initiative. So there's programs in Department of Agriculture, Interior, Labor that all fit this 40% guideline. And as you've seen over and over again in the presentation, the 3 competitions either meet or exceed this criteria, right? For one of the programs, all the funding must be spent or flowed to disadvantaged communities. And one of them, it definitely needs to fit that 40% criteria. So let's look at how we are defining disadvantaged communities. The EPA, in all their guidance around specifically the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, have pointed to 2 main mapping tools that will guide what determines what a disadvantaged community is in the eyes of the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. So the first is, there's a screenshot of it on the right side of the screen. It's a map of Michigan with some counties highlighted and not highlighted, and some geographic areas, I should say, highlighted and not highlighted. This was built by the Council of Environmental Quality, and it's a climate and economic justice screening tool. The second mapping tool that the EPA mentions in their guidance around their Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund is a tool they've had for a while, the EJ screen tool, or the Environmental Justice Screen tool. That tool looks at information on a census block level. And in general, in case you haven't seen or dealt with or interacted with these kinds of tools before, they are overlaying different types of geographic data to see what does, how do things like environmental factors, socioeconomic factors, and demographic factors overlap to highlight which communities may need, extra investment in them. So those are environmental factors like air pollution, proximity to highly contaminated areas, contaminated groundwater, risk of flooding, things like that. And then socioeconomic and demographic factors like percent of residents in the area that are low income, the cost of energy or energy burdens, where people may be have a language isolation. So English is not their primary language, they're not proficient in English, which would make them difficult, possibly difficult to reach and share resources with, and health issues like the prevalence of asthma or cancers in a certain area. So all of these pieces of information are overlapped in different ways to highlight which communities may be considered disadvantaged. The third point on the screen here is that additional criteria is likely going to be shared when the application's open for the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, when that NOFA comes out that Eli mentioned. And we think that this additional criteria is maybe going to address some of the gaps that these other two mapping tools may present. So, let's say there are dispersed communities that may be dispersed within a census tract, or low-income households that may be spread out in a higher income community. So yeah, that we think that that's what the EPA was addressing when they were when they said they were going to have the additional criteria. So the Justice 40 and the Greenhouse Gas Initiative, as we've heard already a couple of times, Justice 40, that principle is built in throughout the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. It's large, it's multiple billions of dollars. So this should really be a once in a lifetime opportunity to address some of those concerns and those issues that communities have been facing for a long time. Could be a great opportunity, right, to make sure that clean energy is deployed equitably in an just manner, improving air quality, creating good jobs, building wealth in underserved communities. Who are getting the contracts to do this work? Are we focusing on small businesses? Are we having opportunities for communities to own some of these projects? And so some of the additional ways that the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund is ensuring that they hit the mark on it, that this work is actually done. There's a technical assistance funds that Eli mentioned. There are some funds available to build capacity for smaller organizations who want to get into the space, who currently don't have the ability to. And there's accountability that's built into quite a number of pieces of each of the competitions. And that accountability looks like the need to submit an equity accountability plan when you submit your grant application, which means advisory committees with representation from the community that you want to serve, being evaluated on an annual basis and how you're meeting your equity criteria. And in what ways are you making changes within your organization, your policies and practices to make sure that you are, again, hitting all of those targets. And last, I'll speak a little bit to some of the projects that Michigan Saves has worked on recently that both Mary and Eli have already mentioned, and remind everyone that we were created to address market gaps. We are continually focused on addressing market gaps. And we really do see that there is work to be done to make sure that we do have that just transition to a clean energy economy. Two of the programs that we launched and worked on in the past couple of years are the Revolving Loan Fund and the Detroit Loan Fund. With the Revolving Loan Fund, we did some of that coordination. We stacked rebates and incentives and kind of took a whole home look for low, moderate income households, I think primarily in the city of Detroit. And we worked with great local partners throughout different parts of Michigan. We worked with Walker Miller Energy Services, Washtenaw Community Action Agency, Habitat for Humanity. So groups that know the communities very well that we were trying to serve. We worked with them to design this program to, again, stack those incentives along with the affordable Michigan Saves loan to make sure we were getting a lot of the really important energy efficiency and clean energy improvements in homes that maybe otherwise wouldn't have been able to afford them. And the second program is the Detroit Loan Fund that launched last year. And as was mentioned before, it uses alternative underwriting criteria. So we are not considering credit scores in the loan approval or denial process. So we are essentially expanding the eligibility of who can potentially be approved for a Michigan Saves loan. And that program has been very successful. We have already made about $1.5 million in loans on the residential side of things. We also have a commercial component to this. And we are adding new contractors to our network that was mentioned earlier, contractors that serve underrepresented communities really well. So we're really happy with how that program is going. And last, we've made it a point in our strategic plan that we adopted last year to create opportunities to listen, learn, and co-create programs with communities. So right now, we are starting the process of working with two very local communities and organizations in both of those communities to craft these really deep intentional listening sessions. So we know exactly what are the barriers to adopting these programs. What do how might we craft a program that would make energy efficiency, these upgrades, these clean energy upgrades to your home workable for you? So that is work that we're really excited to be embarking on. And with that, I will pass it back over to Eli.
Awesome. Thank you, Nishat. And my apologies for the slides periodically jumping where this is new for me, and I'm trying to see if there's questions. And every time I try to look to see if there's a question, I end up messing up the slides. So my apologies for that. Okay. All right. So next steps. So one thing is we really want to make sure that everyone in Michigan has like a one-stop shop where they can go to access information from the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund as the EPA continues to release it. The EPA has a website, but it can be a little confusing. And then also there might be things that are more specific to Michigan. So we're going to create a Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund website where you can track all things NCIF, CCIA, and Solar for All. We're also going to have an email listserv that you can sign up for that will alert you to anything important in case you want to continue to track this. And then lastly, this is kind of our big ask from this webinar. We're really now going to move into like the project and program design stage of this. So we want to figure out what's the best way to have continued engagement with all the stakeholders that will be involved in this. So when this webinar is done, all the registrants will receive an email that will provide this website an opportunity to join the listserv, and then also have the link to provide us feedback via that feedback form. So please feel free to, to send us that information, sign up, look at the website, sign up for the listserv. And then lastly, we're just always available, and we want to talk with anyone and everyone, in Michigan about this. So please give us a call. And we want to meet with community-based organizations. We want to talk with contractors. We want to talk with lenders. We want to talk with everyone. So please give us a call, and we'd love to just chat with you about what's the most equitable, way we can implement this with the biggest impact. So I want to thank you all so much for taking the time to join us today. There's my email address, elieberman@michigansaves.org. We've got info@michigansaves.org if it's just something more general. And then lastly, good old michigansaves.org, that beautiful website that, that shows everything that we're up to. So please check that out. And then also questions. We have a few minutes here, so time for questions. Let me see if I can look at the question thing without ruining this whole presentation, which I've been continually doing. So let me check here. Okay, I've got one question on how lenders can get involved. So yeah, so if you're a community lender and you're looking to access, let's say NCIF dollars, well, that's going to be through one of those 2 to 3 nationwide nonprofits. One might be the Coalition for Green Capital. So I would say connecting with Michigan Saves could be a really interesting way, and probably the best path to figure out how to get hooked into the NCIF. If you're going after CCIA monies, that's that 2 to 7 nationwide nonprofits that will pass through 95% of the funds to community lenders, that with the maximum amount being that 5.6 million. I would say likely you have a coalition that you work with, like say Opportunity Finance Network, if you're in the CDFI credit union space, and they are going to be the ones that will likely apply on behalf of your regional organization. So I would say for CCIF dollars, going to sort of that coalition that you're a member of would be the best path for a lender to get involved. And then for Solar for All, it's going to be working with the state as they start to solicit feedback on the program design for Solar for All. So that's what I would say there. Is the greenhouse gas reduction fund intended for lending programs or grants for incentives available too? So as we were talking about, the NCIF and the CCIA are sort of mostly for lending programs. The Solar for All allows for that rebate, that incentive subsidy piece. But if you go back to the triangle, it's about the whole ecosystem. And within the whole ecosystem, there are lots of grants and rebates available. So the homes rebates, the HERA rebates, which are for multifamily and single family to become more energy efficient, we can work those in to a CCIA lending partner green loan via Michigan Saves. So while the GGRF is limited to grants only in the Solar for All piece, there are lots of other ways that grants and rebates can be brought in, and they need to be brought in, and they need to be brought in a coordinated way. So I hope that answers your question. And then following up on that, when do you expect the financing to be available to complement the grants? So for homes in HERA, the Department of Energy is leading those, and they've said that it's also on a summer timeline. We'll know a lot more about those. The solar investment tax credit, it's live, it's in effect, but we don't have guidance yet from the Treasury Department on what direct pay looks like and how that will be implemented. So we're still waiting for that. The home energy efficiency tax credit, that's ready to go. So that is one that a homeowner can take advantage of. So some are already out, and then some will need a little more guidance from. And again, if you sort of subscribe to the listserv website, I think if there's an important part of that triangle ecosystem for the GGRF, we'll post it there, so you could track it there. And that is all I'm seeing for questions. Anyone else out there? Okay, well, I think we will wrap it up a few minutes early. Thank you all so much. I really hope this was of use. And then please, yes, join the listserv, check out the Michigan Saves website, and fill out the feedback form. And thank you again so much. And we'll likely want to do another webinar once that NOFO comes out, that application, because that's when we're really going to know what the program's going to look like and really, know the nuts and bolts of it. So thank you all so much, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.